My name is Faith. I'm 22 and I live with my mom, Gail, in a small town outside of Atlanta called Havenwood, Georgia. Our modest house is near the tree line, where you can still hear the cicadas in the mornings. We don't live well. Mom sews custom orders, and after finishing college, I help out whenever I can. Sometimes I sell baked goods at the market, sometimes I hand out flyers. Anything to bring in a little money. My dad left when I was 10. All that remains is an old photograph where he's wearing a suit, looking like he's in a foreign skin. Since then, Mom has trusted no one but God and Pastor Andrew. Every Sunday, we went to the church, an old wooden structure, dark blue, with a slightly crooked cross and the smell of old wood and candle wax at the entrance. There, in a small, unassuming room behind the altar, Pastor Andrew managed the parish affairs. Sometimes he called me in to help sort donations or rewrite lists of parishioners in need. He was about 20 years older than me, but well-kept, with clear eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He never allowed himself even a single extra glance. Even in the summer, when the heat hit 90 degrees and I came in a thin sundress, he showed no tension or desire. But something began to change. Maybe it was in me. I felt myself becoming a woman over the years, not just physically, but emotionally. The boys from town seemed boring with their talk of fishing, video games, and trucks. And I wanted something more. I wanted someone to look at me not just as a sweet girl, but as a woman capable of stirring desire. One particularly muggy Sunday, I chose a light, small-print floral dress. It barely touched my knees, the fabric hugged my waist, and the neckline was, shall we say, playful. I braided my hair loosely, leaving a few strands near my face. On my feet were simple beige flats and a thin ankle bracelet. Mom snorted but said nothing. When I entered the church office, the pastor, as always, sat behind his laptop, leaning on the desk. I sat down next to him, as usual, and began counting the change from the collection box. All I could hear was the click of the old mouse and the hum of the fan under the desk, but the silence was different, thick, tense. I felt his gaze occasionally brush against me, but it instantly returned to the screen. I leaned over, pretending to drop a coin, and my shoulder momentarily exposed itself. Just the edge, a subtle hint, but I saw his fingers clench the armrest of his chair. He coughed as if from dust. "Faith," he said quietly, "I think you can go now. Thank you for your help. I need to finish this report." I looked up. He wasn't looking at me. I stood up, moving slowly, knowing that every step was like the tolling of a bell. I paused at the doorway, touching the frame, and glanced back. He was still pretending to work, but the veins in his hands were tense, his back straight as a board. I walked into the hallway. My heart pounded loudly. I leaned against the water cooler and took a sip of water. Just then, there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Simmons, a neighbor from our street. I heard her calling for Pastor Andrew, complaining about problems in her family, something about her husband and a new neighbor. The words were unintelligible, but her tone was agitated. I didn't want to interrupt. I waited for her to leave. My heart was still racing. I returned to the office. The door was slightly ajar. He stood by the window, his back to me. I entered quietly. He didn't turn around. "Pastor," I breathed. "I can't understand what's happening to me. It's like something is waking up inside." I tried to fight it. He slowly turned. Our eyes met. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. He just walked over and touched my hand. Not roughly, not intrusively, gently, as if asking permission. In that minute, the office smelled of incense and honey, and the fan hummed like suppressed breathing. And when his fingers slid over my wrist, I didn't flinch, I didn't leave. I just closed my eyes and lingered. After that Sunday at the church, everything changed. Subtly, silently, but irreversibly. I still came on Sundays, wearing the same light dress or something even softer, almost sheer in the light, but always within the bounds of modesty. Mom noticed nothing. She believed in my meekness and in Pastor Andrew as an icon on the wall. But I was no longer just helping sort candles and prayer requests. Now he called me in on weekdays too for help with parish paperwork. And I always went. That Wednesday, I arrived earlier than usual. I wore a beige pencil skirt with a modest slit in the back, and a white cotton blouse that was slightly sheer in the morning sun. My hair was styled in a high bun, only a thin gold chain at my throat and small earrings hinting that I wasn't entirely the girl from the church shop anymore. The office door was ajar. I knocked, but there was no answer. Peeking inside, I saw him sitting by the window. He was holding a note, but he wasn't reading it. He was just staring into space. When he heard my steps, he started, as if waking from a dream. "Faith, forgive me. I was distracted. Come in." I entered, sat down, and began tidying the file cabinet. He was silent. The quiet was not the same as before. It wasn't tense, but filled with an inner anticipation. It was as if we were both waiting for who would first say what had been building up. "Do you feel well?" I asked cautiously, without looking up from the papers. He turned to me. His gaze was like that of a man with nowhere to run. "Faith, you are young, beautiful, and smart. But this place, it can become a cage. The church saves souls, but sometimes it confuses the heart." I didn't answer. I just looked at him for a long time, and something shifted in his face. He stood up, walked closer. I smelled the frankincense and tea on his clothes. His fingers brushed the sleeve of my blouse lightly, as if testing the fabric. But I knew it wasn't about the fabric. "I think you deserve more than modest work here," he said quietly. "You could be somewhere where you are truly valued, where you are free." "What if I like being here?" I looked up at him. "What if I choose this cage myself?" He held my gaze. And in that moment, I wasn't just Faith from Havenwood. I was a woman who knew what she wanted. He stepped back, sat behind his desk, as if hiding, as if a boundary had returned between us. I stood up and walked closer. "Pastor," I whispered, "may I stay a little longer? Just sit here beside you." He nodded. I sat right on the edge of the desk, crossing my legs carefully. His gaze slid to my ankle, adorned with the bracelet. The very one I wore every Sunday. A symbol he had definitely memorized. The office was quiet again, only the sound of keyboard clicks, but he typed hesitantly, as if every letter was an effort. I leaned closer to the screen, pretending to look at a document. "You have a typo here," I said, lightly touching the screen with my finger. "Do you see it?" He froze. Our hands almost touched. I felt the warmth of his palm nearby. A second. Another. He pulled back. "I'm sorry, I need to finish this report. It's better if you..." He didn't finish. I stood up. Not because he asked, but because I wanted to show that I understood everything and would accept everything, but on my own terms. When I left the room, my feet felt light, as after a confession. But deep inside, a certainty grew. We had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. It was Friday evening. The small town was winding down. Markets were closing, women with bags walked home along the cracked sidewalks, and even the dogs barked weakly. I stood before the mirror, looking at myself with surprise and a sharp anticipation. I wore a light gray fitted dress, just below the knees, with a high collar and a cutout on the back. The material flowed softly over my body, accentuating my curves. On my feet, dark leather pumps with a steady heel. My hair was tied in a low ponytail. My fingers had a clear polish. Nothing vulgar, but there was something deliberate about the look. I knew where I was going and why. When I entered the church, it was almost empty. Only candles flickered in the far corner. Pastor Andrew was in the vestry, but hearing steps he came right out. "Faith, I didn't expect you. Is everything all right?" "I just felt anxious," I replied. "I couldn't stay home. May I sit for a bit?" He nodded and motioned for me to enter the office. Everything was as usual. The desk, the icon in the corner, a couple of folders, the old laptop, and the familiar hum of the fan. I sat on the stool, crossing my legs. He sat opposite, silent, restrained, but the tension was in his every movement. His fingers gripped the wooden armrests of his chair. "You seem to be avoiding me," I said quietly, without looking him in the eye. "Did I do something wrong?" "Faith." His voice was steady but strained. "You know everything is too complicated. I must be an example to the people, and you make me doubt even myself." He abruptly stood up, pacing the room. A struggle was palpable in his figure. Yet he turned back to me. "Why did you come here tonight dressed like this? Why this look?" I looked straight at him. "What if I want you to see me not just as a girl from the parish, but as a woman. He stepped closer, right to the edge of danger. I could smell the incense, the tight strap of his watch on his wrist, the strained fold near his lips. I can't, he whispered. You can, I said, holding his gaze. But you're afraid. Silence hung for a second. Then he reached out hesitantly and touched my palm. His fingers trembled. I squeezed them back. He sighed. A step. Another. We stood almost touching. I felt his breath on my neck. My whole body vibrated, as if air were boiling under my skin. His hand rested on my waist. Gently, as if he wanted to read everything I felt through it. Faith. His voice was husky again. Do you understand that right now we are breaking everything? I nodded. And do you want to stop? He didn't answer. He just pulled me closer, as if silence itself were the answer. We didn't cross the line, but we stood on it, balancing as if over a cliff. His lips were close, but didn't touch mine. My back felt the tremor of his hand, but clothing remained between us. There was more intensity in that than in any embrace. Then a knock. Someone at the church entrance. We sprang apart as if scalded. Go, he breathed. It's not time now. I nodded. Walked out as if nothing had happened, but everything had happened. Without kisses, without words, without sin, but with a desire so hot it burned through the fabric between us. The next Sunday was chilly and gray. Fall had covered Havenwood with a soft blanket of rain and wind. I chose a strict black coat with a belt for the service. A wool beret the color of wine. Neat curls underneath. High-heeled boots and a tight-fitting, graphite-colored wool dress, modest but without a hint of provocation. Everything was decent. Everything was proper. But inside me was something that could no longer be silent. The thing that had awakened between us was now living its own life. And nothing would ever be the same. When I entered the church, Pastor Andrew didn't even look up right away. I sat with the parishioners as usual. Only his voice during the sermon trembled, faintly, but I heard it. After the service, he approached. Faith, we need to talk. In the office. Now. I nodded. We entered. He closed the door. You know the rumors have started? Mrs. Simmons, the one who saw you leave here Friday night. She told someone on the church council. It's reached the elder board. And what are they saying? That you're here too often, he didn't meet my eyes. And that I'm supposedly losing my piety. I smiled, with a sudden sharpness. And are you losing yours? He looked up. In his eyes was everything. Fear, anger, lust, guilt. Faith, if this continues, I'll be removed. I'll lose everything. And if it stops? I stepped closer. What do I lose then? He backed up to the desk, leaning on it, as if short of breath. I can't pray like I used to, he whispered. I can't preach virtue when you are in my head every night. In that white dress, with the ankle bracelet. Chills ran down my spine. I walked over and silently unbuttoned my cuff, pretending to fix my sleeve. His gaze lingered on my wrists, then my lips. No one is forcing you to lie, I said quietly. But you can be honest, at least here with me. At that moment, there was a loud knock on the door. We both jumped. Pastor, forgive me. It was young Ethan, the choir director. The regional overseers are here. They say they're from Atlanta. They want to speak with you. I paled. He clenched his lips. I'll be right out. When we were alone for one last moment, he grabbed my hand firmly. Please, don't come here alone again. Not in the morning, not in the evening, never. Is that an order? It's a plea. I pulled my hand away, not roughly but decisively. Then tell me that not as a priest, but as a man. He was silent, and I walked out. My coat snapped shut with a cold sound. Rain lashed the window as I walked away from the church. But a fire burned inside me. I knew we had been exposed. Now everything would be different. We would either be torn apart or joined forever. I didn't appear at church for nearly 2 weeks. Autumn had grown heavy and damp during that time. The air smelled of soil, rotten leaves, and cold. Mom asked why I stopped going to services, but I brushed her off, saying I was tired. All that time I dreamed. I stood in the empty church, barefoot in my nightgown, while judgmental shadows watched me from the corners. He was among them. His face was the last thing I saw before the dome cracked and the candles went out. One night, I couldn't bear it. I put on a long black skirt, a thick sweater, and braided my hair like a child. No makeup, no perfume. As if I were returning to the faith I was before it all happened. I came on a Wednesday. There was no service, but the church doors were unlocked. He stood by the window, his back to me. I knocked on the doorframe. He didn't turn around right away. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know," I replied. "But I can't be anywhere else." He slowly turned. Weariness covered his face, shadows around his eyes. On the desk was an open box. Inside lay his cross, his wedding ring, his personal notebook, and a ticket. "To Charlotte," he said calmly. "I asked for the transfer myself. I can't do this anymore. Not because of the rumors. Because of you." He walked closer, stopping one step away. His eyes were dark, as if they had absorbed all the evening light from the window. "Did you come to say goodbye?" "No," I said. "I came to know who I was to you." He closed his eyes as if in pain. "You were a temptation, but also a salvation. I stopped being alive until I met you, and now I'm becoming dead again." I stepped forward, touched his face. "Then why are you leaving?" He didn't answer. He just hugged me, softly, as if afraid to break me. His hand rested on the back of my head. He held me tightly, as if for the last time, silently. But I felt him memorizing every detail of that moment. Then he took a step back. "I can't stay. And you have to stay here, keep living. Will you leave me anything?" I whispered. "Just a word." He walked to the desk, took the notebook, opened it to the last page, wrote something quickly, and tore out the sheet. "Don't read it now. Read it when you feel it's time." He placed the paper in my palm, covered it with his hand, then walked to the door and opened it. The light from the hallway was blindingly cold. "Goodbye, Faith." I was left alone. The note trembled in my hand. When I finally opened it at home that night, there was only one sentence. "If I were a different man, I would have stayed for you. But then you wouldn't have loved me."